Hi, this is Robin. I'm Ruth. This is Luca. He is not a dog. And this is our grandson who we're watching today. And this is a Mirror Darkly Unbridled Inquiry. And our topic today is, are we doomed?
As doomed can be.
Yes. As Ed Grimley would say.
Yes.
Yes. So Luca's looking a little rough around the edges. He's cutting some serious molars, and so he's been pretty miserable all day. So we kind of have a dirty, snotty face, but he's got his binky, he's got his blankie, and we're armed with water and with treats for him. So hopefully he will chill for the next hour.
His parents are off having fun.
Yes, and so we get him for the day.
Yes. Super
happy.
Okay, so are we doomed? The short answer is no.
Show's over. It was nice seeing you.
Yeah, it was nice seeing you. Jonah Goldberg, who used to write for National Review, now he's got his own thing that he does. And he pointed out in his newsletter that he sends out each week the following. He said, during the Bush years, big swaths of the left convinced itself that we were living under some kind of despot. Never mind that if George W. Bush was half the tyrant the Naomi Wolf or Cynthia McKinney types claimed, they wouldn't be allowed to call Bush a tyrant. One of the hallmarks of tyranny is that it's dangerous to criticize the tyrant. If there's a Michael Moore in North Korea, he's working in a labor camp by day and crapping in a bucket by night, if he's lucky. He's not getting rich off of movies mocking Kim Jong-un. And the same thing happens on the right. That is, you have people claiming that, the current president is a dictator and he's just waiting to take over all our rights and privileges and he's going to destroy everything. And the reality is, if any of that sort of thing were true, then you wouldn't hear about it. You'd only hear happy, good news. You would never hear that you're losing your rights. Nobody would ever criticize public officials. As long as you're hearing criticism of public officials, obviously we are not living in a tyranny. There are some women that are afraid that we're going to fall into a Handmaid's Tale. Given the fact that you have women's studies programs in all the major universities, you have arguments going on between trans feminists and feminists, you've got women in the Congress and in various positions of authority. You have women running corporations and on and on and on. And the fact that people keep yelling and screaming at each other about these sorts of things would tend to make you think that this is not the Handmaid's Tale. As you actually watch the Handmaid's Tale and then actually take a look at, walking around outside, you'll find that things are not as horrific as you might imagine them to be. There is a tendency, for whatever reason, to catastrophize anything that one's political opponents do, and to imagine that, this action that they're taking, this proposal, is going to absolutely destroy the world. And that turns out usually not to be the case. That is, when Mitt Romney was suggesting different changes in tax law and some other things, the current president, who was then, I think, running for vice president, commented that Mitt Romney was going to put black people back in their chains. And that's a bit of an overreaction to alterations in tax or financial policies. It's just weird behavior and thinking. And we actually have a term for that kind of thinking. It's called clinical depression. If every time you face a disagreement, a problem, and you go off in a screaming fit, there's probably more of an issue with you than it is with what's going on outside in the world. My youngest daughter called me this week screaming at me because she couldn't find her pillow. Now, she suffers from bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder, and she'd been off her meds for a day or two. Her reaction to not being able to locate a pillow was a bit over the top. And as I listened to some pundits and politicians and the things that they say, they remind me of her off her meds. It's just a bit extreme. People need to walk outside, look around, take a deep breath, and relax. Today on the way over here, we were listening to 80s music, because that's what Ruth likes. And
it's the station we can agree on.
Yes. And there is a song on called Dirty Laundry by Don Henley. If you heard it, you probably would recognize it. Maybe not.
Don't sing it.
I'm not going to sing
You're
it. I'm not him, and I don't have any illusions about my singing abilities. I know that a sick donkey sings better than I do. Anyway, some of the words: I make my living off the evening news, just give me something I can use. People love it when you lose, they love dirty laundry. Well, I could have been an actor, but I wound up here. I just have to look good. I don't have to be clear. Come and whisper in my ear, give us dirty laundry. Kick 'em when they're up, kick 'em when they're down. Kick 'em when they're up, kick 'em when they're down, and so on. We got the bubble-headed bleached blonde comes on at 5. She can tell you about the plane crash with a gleam in her eye. It's interesting when people die. Give us dirty laundry. Can we film the operation? Is the head dead yet? You know, the boys in the newsroom got a running bet. Get the widow on the set. We need dirty laundry. We don't really need to find out what's going on. We don't really want to know just how far it's gone. Just leave well enough alone. Eat your dirty laundry, and so on. And that is the essence of what the news media has been for a while. I mean, this song came out in the 1980s, and it really hasn't changed a whole lot, except now that we get to watch it 24 hours a day, should you be that masochistic and choose to do such a thing to yourself, which would not be wise.
Actually, isn't the 80s when CNN started?
It may have been the 80s.
Yeah, and that's kind of began the
I mean,
whole
what
24-hour
really,
news cycle.
yeah, what really pushed it was the
Iraq War.
Iraq War, the first one.
Was that 90s?
91.
Okay.
I think is when it was. 91. Yeah, 91.
And that was kind of the starting of the 24-hour
the 24-hour
news,
news cycle. People became glued to that, and it just has metastasized since then. This is not to say that the world lacks problems, but to constantly catastrophize one's thinking is an indication that you've lost touch with reality to some extent. That is, a mentally ill person, particularly one suffering from bipolar or schizoaffective disorder, has a very tenuous connection with reality. And if you are constantly afraid that your political opponents are going to put you in a concentration camp in the United States in the 21st century, you've gone over the deep end. Because that sort of thing simply won't happen. There's no evidence for it. Again, look at the internet. Look at what all the people are saying. You have every possible imaginable idea floating around out there with groups of people certain that this horrible thing is happening or that horrible thing is happening. And you have groups on all different sides condemning in the most vociferous terms members of the people that they consider their opposition. We have an enormous amount of freedom. And we tend to take it for granted. Now, one could argue that perhaps there is some value in overreacting to perceived slights against our rights, because that will protect us from ever getting into serious compromises regarding our rights. Sort of like the practice of building the hedge around the law. That is, you don't want to ever take God's name in vain, so you just never say God's name at all. And a lot of the overreactions to actions by political opponents remind me of that kind of activity. That is, well, they've said this or they've done that. Well, that's eventually going to lead to this horrible thing way over there. Probably not. But we need to stop this right here so we don't get to that horrible place, is the attitude.
I think it's important to speak out about it, because if you don't, then it could happen.
Well, speaking out about it's fine, but do
Right.
it in a reasonable, rational
Right.
way. That is, don't, like, again, our youngest daughter yesterday, or the day before, whenever it was, screaming at the top of her lungs, you know, what a horrible person I am and how horrible everything is and how we've done these horrible things to her and we're purposely hiding her pillow or we got rid of it or somebody threw it away or whatever. You know, we could just buy you a new freaking pillow if it comes to that. But, you know, if you're at that level of irrationality and unable to hear what somebody else is saying on the other side, again, you've gone beyond what's even close to being rational anymore. You have allowed your emotions to entirely take control of you.
Well, I think part of the reason why people think that that things will spiral out of control is the idea of the slippery slope. And the important thing to remember with the slippery slope is that there's usually friction.
Yes.
And that's what speech is. Speech is the friction that keeps us from sliding down the slippery slope.
Yes.
So reasonable speech and speech that enlightens people, not just screaming hairy fits, is that what prevents the slippery slope.
Right. And you know, over the years, people have freaked out about various things that have turned out never to happen.
I mean, if you think about it, if somebody is sliding down a hill, like they've fallen and they're sliding down a hill, they do whatever they can to stop the momentum.
Yes.
So the same thing is true with society, is that you do what you can to try to stop the momentum of the downward slide. So
Right.
I think it's really reasonable to just tell yourself that this could be a slippery slope, but there, as long as people are speaking out, there will be enough friction to stop it.
Right. And
It's when speech is silenced, like in communist countries and in totalitarian countries, where people aren't allowed to speak freely, don't have free access to the internet, things like that. That's when slippery slopes happen.
yes, when you have the knock on the door and you're hauled off to a concentration camp somewhere and you disappear.
Right. I mean, even counseling in our country doesn't happen on the level that it does in other countries.
No.
Because in communist countries, if you're canceled, you're legitimately canceled. Like,
Yeah, if you want to see what
it's on your
cancel-
death certificate.
Yeah, if you want to see what canceling can be like, read the book 1984. That is, Winston Smith was working for the Ministry of Truth, and that was precisely their task, which was to erase and change things. That is, he who controls the past controls the present, he controls the present, controls the future. And so the regime would issue a 5-year plan. It didn't turn out quite the way they predicted, so everything gets rewritten. Or if they suddenly go to war with this country that they had been at peace with, and now they're at peace with this country they had been at war with, everything gets rewritten so that we've always been at war with this country and always been at peace with the other country. Or if a person falls out of favor, then they simply vanish. All records of them and past news accounts and everything else are eliminated. And Orwell based what he was writing about on what he saw going on in the Soviet Union and what had happened in Nazi Germany, but more what was going on in communist society in the Soviet Union, where they would actually alter photographs. That is, you'd have this photograph of a group of guys, that were part of the regime, and then new photographs come out, and one of the guys just wasn't there anymore.
Well, and you talked about how their encyclopedias, they would send you a new page to glue in.
Yes.
And replace the old page.
Yep, and you obediently were supposed to do that.
Yeah. So we're at the end of a 10-minute segment. The show runs in 10-minute segments, and this is a time for any comments or any questions or show ideas that people post in the comments that I read them. So we did get a comment from Don Parker, who used to be our Director of Missions for the High Desert area, and he said, "Continue prayers for your ministry." We thank you, Don, for that. And if you have any questions or anything you want to contribute to the discussion, feel free to do that.
Yes.
So good to hear from you. I will say that I had trouble sharing today. The Facebook has made sharing this this webcast very difficult, and
not just this one in particular, but any
in general.
webcast
Like
is
I only
difficult.
have usually 5 or 6 people. I used to be able to like share with like a ton of people on my friends list, but it's usually like 5 or 6, maybe 7 that I can share with. This time there was absolutely no one. So
Yeah.
I posted a link to it on my Facebook page, and I messaged a link to it to my mom, and so hopefully people are able to tune in
Which is why you should become a member of the
or follow. Yeah.
the YouTube channel or the Facebook page.
Yeah, subscribe to the Mirror Darkly YouTube channel and follow the Mirror Darkly Facebook page, because then you get notified
Right.
when we go live.
Yeah.
And we do go live most Saturdays, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, sometimes things come up.
Yes.
There was the possibility that because he'd take care of our grandson today that we wouldn't have been here, but it worked out.
Yep, he got a little bit of a nap. He fell asleep like 12 minutes before we got here.
Yeah, his
So he's
teething has made him quite
semi-napless.
miserable today, but he's
Yeah.
doing okay at the moment,
Yep.
so that's a good thing.
So we are here until he starts screaming. So if
Yeah,
he starts
so-
screaming mid-show, we will
Cut it
cancel
short,
ourselves.
perhaps.
We will disappear.
Yes. Yeah, now canceling is not a good thing, but I would argue, based on just looking at history in general, that it is a fad that will not endure. Simply because, what's the saying? If something can't go on this way, then it won't. And it's the sort of thing that just cannot last, because eventually everybody eats their own, and you end up with, certain people will eventually just call a halt to it, and it just won't go on anymore. And it's a silly sort of thing. And again, particularly in the modern world, it's incredibly difficult to actually cancel anyone. That is, okay, so you get canned from a particular website. Well, you can create your own website, you can join other websites. I mean, your options are wide open. There's nothing stopping you from being able to get your message out. And if you already have followers and people that like you, they will follow you wherever you happen to end up. It can be difficult, and we've had periods of time in history where people had to be quiet about their political point of view for whatever reason, but those periods of time pass, and things go back to the way they are, where it's more open. But part of the problem is with social media, it's a new way for us to gather together as social beings. That is, human beings are social creatures. We like to hang out with each other. And each new technology that comes along, it takes us a while to get fully comfortable and acclimated to it. And things like Facebook and Twitter are still pretty new, and there's much that's good in it, but it also shows our ugly side. And the ugly side of Twitter and Facebook is no different than the ugly side of us in face-to-face conversations. That is, people were getting divorced, people were having fights, people were murdering each other, and so on, yelling at each other, screaming, stomping off, breaking things, whatever, long before the advent of social media. And so what we see on social media is a verbal version of the same sorts of behaviors that we've always had, because human beings are often reprehensible. And no matter what platform we choose to use, a certain amount of that reprehensibleness is going to come out. Eventually, we'll figure out how to handle it in the virtual world as well as we handle it in the real world, which may or may not be an optimistic point of view, because I'm not sure we handle it that well in the real world either. But we make a big deal about it in the virtual world because it's new. So, did you have a comment or any comments? No?
We're not at the 10-minute thing yet.
Okay.
So.
There have been, of course, periods of time in history where, and even in the U.S., where rights have been restricted far more than anything that we see in the current world. That is, the reason that the U.S. president has the kind of power that he has is a consequence of the Civil War. As Abraham Lincoln was derided as a tyrant by a lot of people because he did things that were somewhat tyrannical. Now, the reason being that he was completely focused on trying to keep the Union from falling apart. And so he would do things to try to prevent worse things from happening, and essentially his attitude was, I'll do this and ask for forgiveness later. And so,
Do you think he would have mean tweeted?
His personality was different.
Okay. He'd make you want to read it and then feel sorry that you did?
No.
Okay.
He was
a diplomatic sort of thing.
He was much more diplomatic. I mean, he'd spent years as a lawyer, and he was a somewhat melancholy sort of individual. Yeah, his personality just was not one to be doing mean tweets or being mean to anybody. I mean, he'd do what he had to do, but he was the sort of person that was more likely to forgive than anything else. For instance, I was reading this recently, I'll get the numbers wrong, but there are 300 and something Native Americans that have been arrested for murdering a bunch of people, and he pardoned almost all of them. So he just didn't feel comfortable allowing them to be executed. And he would do that with deserting soldiers and that sort of thing as well. That is, the law was that they would, supposed to be hanged or firing squad, but he would pardon them instead. He just wasn't comfortable with that kind of extreme behavior. But he suspended habeas corpus. He, did things that on the surface were not entirely compatible with constitutional rights and privileges. But it was all temporary. However, the one thing that did happen is, and this was the significant change, I think I've mentioned this, I don't know if I mentioned it here or not, but it used to be that we would refer to the United States R. That is, the United States referred to with a plural. After the Civil War, it's the United States is.
Interesting. Did not know that.
And the power of Washington and the control of Washington over the rest of the country increased tremendously during the Civil War. And it didn't give up that power. And so the centralization of federal control has its roots in what happened with the Civil War and with Abraham Lincoln's approach to things. You also see an increase in federal control during the Wilson administration and then again during the Roosevelt administration. But they were only continuing the same pattern that you had developed with Lincoln. And I would say Lincoln has far more to do with the centralized nature of our federal government than either Wilson or Roosevelt. Now, both Roosevelt and Wilson violated constitutional rights. Wilson and the Congress at the time passed a law that restricted freedom of the press.
Okay, sorry.
Now, the reason for it was because the U.S. was at war, and so they wanted to try to control what was going out but they tended to be used to silence political opponents. But it didn't last. That is, the Supreme Court intervened and things get pushed back, and yeah, it just doesn't stay. Same thing with Roosevelt. During his administration, there were attempts to control and to keep certain things out of the news. And then, of course, with Roosevelt, you have the whole incarceration of Japanese Americans here in the West, on the West Coast, which was a clear violation of their constitutional rights. So that sort of thing does happen, but there tends to be correction to it. And it's improbable that such a thing would ever happen again. Sensibilities are different now than they were then anyway. The level of racism, despite what some people want to tell you, is much less than it used to be. That is, we're concerned with microaggressions now, not with
Actual aggressions.
actual aggressions. So that seems to me to be an improvement. The status of African Americans appears to me, based on stories that older African Americans told me, to be better today than it was, say, in the 50s. I think we've mentioned Eula before. Her father taught her how to use a rifle so that she'd be able to shoot KKK members. That's probably not something that people have to worry about so much today.
My phone seems to be frozen.
No, it happens.
Yep, it's just sitting there. We're live. I mean, everything else is showing just fine.
Showing fine. I mean, we've
Just
got
my
a good
phone.
steady stream. So this has been like the third week that
your
we've
head.
had pretty steady. So who knows what the issue was with.
It was even really windy last Sunday, and this was all red. So
Yeah. So who knows? There may be more than just the connection we had. I'm sure the connection was a lot of the problem. I mean, when they came out and fixed it, they agreed that that was causing us issues. But there could be other issues that we were experiencing from Spectrum that have been since rectified. Who knows?
watch your head, buddy. Peekaboo.
But the problem is that people have a very cursory knowledge of history, and so they'll make false analogies. That is, they will look at some slight problem in the modern world and then compare it to some horrific problem in the past. And so a change in voting registration is suddenly being compared to Jim Crow laws. One could argue whether or not the changes in the regulations are good or bad or indifferent, but it's not quite the same as Jim Crow. Just not. We do not, there may be abortion restrictions and weird things going on in Texas. That does not mean that Texas is suddenly becoming the Handmaid's Tale. As you read The Handmaid's Tale and you actually go and visit Texas, it looks a lot different.
You mean their little bonnets don't have Dallas Cowboy stars?
Yeah,
on
there's
the rim?
also no call for polygamy or forced, making women, produce children through multiple partners and whatever it is that
Actually,
goes
if you
on.
want that, you have to go to
Handmaid's
the
Tale.
border of Arizona and Utah.
Yes, there are polygamists, but
Yes.
they tend to get arrested because it's not quite legal.
Yeah.
So, the closest thing that you get to The Handmaid's Tale may be in some Muslim countries where polygamy is legal and the status of women is low. But I'm not sure that even in the horrific conditions that exist for women in a lot of these countries, I'm not sure it's quite as bad even as The Handmaid's Tale there.
Well, the big reason why I won't watch The Handmaid's Tale is because they made it really political. It's not just, it was out there before they started politicizing it.
It was a story.
And and I would have started watching it, except they made it really political. And I don't watch anything that's really political. When I'm watching dramas or whatever for entertainment, I don't want to know what the politics of the people are. I just want to watch it and enjoy it.
I don't really care.
And if I want politics, I'll watch the news,
Yes.
And if I want to know what one side or the other thinks, I'll watch cable news. But I don't, I quit watching a lot of shows during the whole Black Lives Matter thing, not because I have a problem with black people, but because I was tired of the whole white fragility thing, and everybody suddenly was on a political side, and it was like, I'm not enjoying this show anymore. And I let them stack up on my TiVo, and I watch them episode by episode, and as soon as it gets political, I delete the rest of them and I'm done. So, and I think that there are quite a few people that feel that way because a lot of their ratings have gone down because of that. And they've learned, because things are less political now on those shows, because they've learned that people don't want that. They're there to escape. They're there to enjoy. You want a good murder mystery. You don't want to be preached at.
Yeah. One of the things, as an author, for years we were told to make sure that you're not preaching in your storytelling. That is, the story is what is preeminent, and making it interesting and entertaining. If there is some added level to it, then that's fine, but it shouldn't just be you mouthing off what your opinions are on everything under the planet. One of the problems I have with Robert Heinlein's later novels is that you have, usually in them, one character who is kind of a mouthpiece for Robert Heinlein's viewpoints on things, and it's know-it-all, everything he says is right, blah, blah, blah. And it just gets old and tiring. And his later novels just are not as entertaining or as interesting as his earlier stuff. Because the earlier stuff is simply, science fiction. It was entertaining. You didn't get preached at. Being preached at is annoying. Of course, this is coming from someone who preaches. But anyway, that's a different setting. You expect to be preached at if you're sitting in a pew. But if you're reading a book or watching a TV show...
He's got a Post-it pad. Okay, he's 18 months old. He's got a Post-it pad. He's curled it up in his hand, and he's looking through it and going, He's like looking through it like a telescope. Look at that. What 18-month-old knows how to do that?
I have no idea.
That is so funny.
Anyway, interesting behavior.
Distracted everybody. I'm watching him because there's kind of like a cabinet here, and when he stands up, I'm trying to keep him from banging his head. So.
Yeah, well, he still does that.
Yes.
Although he's gotten better at it. He's better at knowing that, okay, I've got to watch, see if there's something above me when I stand up.
Yeah. He stands up slow if he's not sure.
But yeah, I don't want to be preached at in a novel. I just want to read the novel for the novel's sake and to enjoy it. It's supposed to be a story. If there's something more in it than that, then that's fine. But if it's preaching at me and you can tell the difference, then forget it. It's not any fun anymore. And one sees a certain amount of deterioration in the quality of some entertainment because they've allowed the preaching thing to take precedence over the storytelling. And the storytelling always has to be on top. If it's not, then there's a problem. That's kind of writing 101.
Well, even late night TV. I used to watch I grew up on The Tonight Show. My parents watched Johnny Carson. I would hear it when I was in bed at night. I watched Johnny Carson when I got a little older, and I watched Jay Leno. And I started watching Jimmy Fallon, and then I kind of slowed down watching him because it was kind of the same things over and over. And I used to watch the Late Late Show with
Craig Ferguson.
Craig Ferguson. But when he left the show, I quit watching. So it wasn't all just political reasons I quit watching, but they've just gotten super preachy, and they invite famous people on and ask them what their political opinion is. And I don't care what the political opinion of celebrities are. I don't care which side they lean toward. I don't care. I want to know about their movie that they made, if they, how it was made, if they did their own stunts, those kinds of things. That's the kind of stuff I'm interested in from celebrities, not their political
activism.
activism.
About their grandchildren.
Yes, that would be nice too. But I don't care about their political activism. I mean, some of them are doing things like, was it Matt Damon is digging wells in Africa, and I think that's a good thing to do, and I like hearing about that. But I don't really care about some of that other stuff. So, and so I quit watching, and a lot of people have because they're tired of hearing it.
Yeah. It gets boring. Mm-hmm. It's just not.
I watch it for the comedy, and that's what I really enjoyed about late night.
It's not funny anymore. It's lost its point to watch. And political humor can be fun if it's done well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in the current climate, it's not done very well.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. I mean, thinking in terms of preaching, I mean, the book 1984, Animal Farm, are obviously preaching a particular point of view, but it's done in a way that does not bother you. That is, the story is there, and that's what draws you through the entire thing. Obviously, there's more going on than just the story, and it serves as a warning. It's not a how-to guide.
What are you doing, Luca?
Fahrenheit 451, same thing. That is, there is a point of view and something that's being said in that, but again, the story is preeminent. And to lose sight of that, I think, is always a significant mistake. So far as the politicization of news production, that's not a new thing. Historically speaking, most newspapers in the past had specific political points of view. You even see it reflected in some of their names for those that have been around long enough, where part of their name would be Democrat or Republican. But at some point in the 20th century, there was a movement towards supposed objective news delivery, and that was the fad. That's not the norm historically, and so we have returned to the world of the way the news was done back in the 19th century and earlier.
My gauge for news is how do I trust it?
And I don't trust any of it.
No, I mean, like the people that are doing the news, like Walter Cronkite, you could trust. You know what his political stance was, but you could trust the news he was giving you. And I used to really admire like Savannah Guthrie, and she's very, very smart. She has a law degree. She is from Arizona. There's a lot of things I liked about her. But then when she went after those Covington kids, and it was patently false, when she found out it was false, she never apologized. And that's the other thing too, is if you're wrong, then apologize. But there wasn't, and that one kid has sued like a lot of news agencies. He's making big bucks because they were wrong and they slandered him, and they basically ruined his life by saying things that weren't true. And so I won't watch her anymore because she won't apologize for being wrong. And I don't care which way the news leans, and if I'm aware of it, then I can adapt to that. Okay, for example, during the 2016 presidential election, I watched, because everything was really, really divided, I watched the Democratic convention via Fox News, and I watched the Republican convention via CNN, because I figured, get a little mix in there. And it was actually quite interesting. But I don't watch political conventions anymore because it's
just
so
annoying.
It is very annoying.
Yeah, well, I've told people before, I teach logic class now and again, and it's particularly entertaining to teach logic during political campaigns.
No?
It can also be very disconcerting for the students when they come to realize that the members of their political party that they like are making horrific logical fallacies and reasoning mistakes. And it's something that is endemic on all sides. That is, everybody uses logical fallacies and does things that are completely irrational. And it's really on display quite clearly during political, campaigns. It's entertaining. It's discouraging, though, for those of us that know what reasoned thought is. And the desert that we live in is
Get your binky. Get it.
hard.
You're lower to the ground. You get it.
Is he getting fussy?
Yeah, he wants his binky. He dropped it, and he wants me to get it. And it's tight in here. Hold on, buddy. Okay, keep talking.
Oh. So, and one sees it, and
There.
I mean, any
Lazy.
meme that one sees on social media is usually logically flawed in serious ways. There is no nuance, there is no reason associated with it. That is, if you can put it, somebody once said that if you can put your philosophy in a nutshell, it belongs there. And that's what a meme is. It's this little short thing, and you have these, handful of lines, and they're expressing some political or philosophical or religious point of view, and it's basically useless because it's just not going to be an accurate portrayal of reality under any circumstances whatsoever. One of the most common errors that I see is what's called the straw man. That is, people will describe their opponents and what their opponents believe in the most extreme terms and then tear them down. And that's a straw man. Straw men are easy to take apart because they're made out of straw. And if you attribute to your opponent ridiculous things, then it's easy to make your opponent look ridiculous. And so both sides, all the different political points of view, will do that with their opponents because it's entertaining and it gets votes, and those that are on your side just eat that up. They love to see it. Because, yes, that's what my opponent is. My opponent is a complete moron and probably evil and eats children for breakfast. So, I don't know.
Well, a
It
certain
gets
amount
very
of schadenfreude
discouraging.
is a good thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a cartoon I read years ago of a guy sitting and something along the lines that those of us that know history get very discouraged watching everybody that's forgotten about history.
No, the way that it goes is those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Those who remember history have to sit around and watch everyone else repeating it. That's the joke.
The joke, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. But it does get discouraging. So my exposure to news is limited to what I can read. Primarily, I read 3 newspapers: LA Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal. And I also look at the CNN website.
Plunk.
And then I've also got a news feed that gives me some other things. Most of my focus tends to be on things that I'm interested in. And so I have a lot of stuff on astronomy,
Model trains,
space travel. Those things make me happy. And plus, that kind of news tends to just be, here's the facts. This is what is happening. Rather than, this means we're all going to die.
Well, it's page 3 of the newspaper that's pretty much factual.
Yeah.
Once you get past, the first page is just dripping in opinion.
Yeah.
When it's supposed to only be facts.
Of course, the back pages sometimes are where real news stories go to die. One of the notorious examples of that is during World War II. Information about what the Nazis were doing to Jewish people was relegated to page 35 of the New York Times. So that sort of stuff was kept where people wouldn't necessarily notice it. Anti-Semitism is an old problem, not just in Europe, but also in the
That,
US.
if you want to talk about systemic racism, I would say anti-Semitism.
Yeah, although it's not systemic in the sense that when people say systemic, I think, well, that means that there are laws and regulations that make this thing an ongoing
Oh, see,
problem.
I see, the way I take it is there are systems that allow it to happen.
Yeah.
And the university system, things like that, there are systems that allow it to happen. That's what I see. So,
Yeah.
like Europe, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, and there's systems there that allow it to happen.
Yeah, I know.
So I think
It's a
maybe
greater-
we need to define what
Yeah,
systemic
well,
racism
to me, it seems a bigger problem if there are laws on the books that make
Right.
discrimination okay. If there is nothing in the laws that make discrimination okay, that is, you don't have a law that says, okay, if your melanin content is at this level, then we can enslave you.
Right.
That is, instead the law says that all people must be treated equally,
Right.
then the problems that exist in the society are not in the system or in the laws. It's going to be in the people that are
Right.
implementing
And I would
laws.
agree with that because
and
at
there
least-
are problems with people.
Right. Oh, yeah. But I would agree with that in this sense because as long as the laws say that people have to be treated equally, you have some recourse.
Right.
If you're treated unfairly, you have some recourse through the law.
Right.
So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Watch
And
your
so
head.
as long as you have recourse through the law, then at least you've
Come here,
got
little dude.
that, even if
Just
it's not.
poison it everywhere.
Oh, yes.
Now we
Oh,
can
well.
eat them.
He'll be happy, scrounging off the
I thought
floor.
it was closed all the way. I was trying to get it from him just in case, and they just went everywhere.
Well, he'll play with them. He'll
Yeah.
eat some of them.
Yes.
He'll build up his immune system.
Yes, and I'll clean them tomorrow when I get in here.
Oh, well.
Is yogurt bad for dogs? I could have Oreo come clean it up.
That I'm not sure. You have to look that up. If anybody's actually listening to us, maybe they can tell us whether or not yogurt is bad for dogs.
These are little Gerber yogurt melts. Can dogs eat them?
Yes, we don't know.
I know that
We'll look it up if
Bella
somebody tells
keeps
us.
eating them, but that doesn't mean it's okay for her to eat them.
Yeah. So anti-Semitism exists in the United States and in European countries, but it's not legal. The reason it exists is because some people are anti-Semitic. Just like some people are racist towards members of various racial groups. And that's an unfortunate thing, and it's because human beings are, again, reprehensible. This is why Jesus had to die on the cross for our sins, because our nature is not always the best. We make poor choices, we have bad attitudes, we believe bad things, we treat people badly. And the unfortunate reality is you can make all the laws you want to forbid bad behavior. Bad behavior still happens.
Yep.
That is, we have laws against pick your crime. Those crimes still exist, which is why we have the court systems and police and everything else, because we know that despite the laws prohibiting certain bad behavior, it still happens. And so one could talk about systemic murder or systemic, pick your crime. It's not part of the system that murder is okay or that any other sort of crime is okay, but because human beings are nasty critters, some of them are going to do those things even though they're prohibited. So we have prohibited slavery, we have prohibited racism, we have enmeshed in our system of government and in our laws that all people are to be treated equally and well, and yet all people are not treated equally and well because human beings are not nice.
Yep.
And no matter how many more laws we pass, people are still going to be reprehensible, and that's the sad reality. That should not make us unhappy, because the odd thing is, and I've repeated this numerous times, the incidence of people behaving badly
Luca,
has actually
touch.
declined over time.
Numbers.
That's one of the points that Steven Pinker made in his book of 10 years ago now, or thereabouts, The Better Angels Are in Nature, that when you look at all the statistics of human behavior and levels of violence, for example, which is what he focuses on in the book, levels of violence have dropped precipitously over the centuries, and particularly through the 20th century and into the 21st. And one of the things he grapples with in the book is trying to figure out why. That is, what has changed in human relationships that the way we treat each other has improved so much. And there's several different lines of thought. Rule of law obviously has had some effect. As you prohibit things, and that does keep some people from doing bad stuff. It also gives you the opportunity of taking the people that are behaving badly and getting them in places where they can't do that anymore.
Right.
It
Unless
gives
you
you
live in LA
recourse.
County.
It gives you recourse to correct behavior. Also, education has had a big impact. Although Pinker disputes it, one could argue that prevalence of Christianity has had some impact. I mean, people don't like to hear it, but when you think in terms of, say, women's right, abolition of slavery, things of that nature, those movements have come out of the most heavily Christianized parts of the world. That is, the movement for women's rights did not arise out of say, Saudi Arabia. And so one could make an argument that perhaps there's something within Christianity that is better for women than what you have in some other religion. You don't see the status of women rising high in India or China. That is, the status of women in those places now is much better than it was, but it's a consequence, Pinker would argue, in general, of Western civilization's dominance over the planet. That is, there are elements of Western civilization that seem to improve how people treat each other and their level of prosperity in general and their health and welfare. So, anyway, read Pinker's book, you get a good overview of things. Or his more recent book, Enlightenment Now, covers much of the same ground. He's got another book coming out at the end of this month on the 28th called Rationality. One of the things I appreciate about Pinker is that he's an optimist. Again, he would argue, as would Matt Ridley, who wrote a book called Rational Optimist, that optimism is the more rational approach, rather than this pessimism that we see so prevalent in our society, which is actually clinical depression.
I'm making my nose.
That is, things tend to improve over time. The world is better today than it used to be. There is less violence, there is less murder, there is more health, there is more wealth, more widely distributed, more evenly distributed than at any time in human history. Which is, again, something you don't get in the news because that's not interesting. We want to see blood and guts and despair. We want dirty laundry, as the song would say.
So we are 5 minutes away from being done. And Luca's producing massive amounts of mucus, so I'm going to have to wipe his nose soon, and I think his bottom needs to be changed as well.
Probably.
He has had a
He's 18
thorough...
months old.
Yes, he's had a thorough snack from the floor. He
Did he
ate...
clean them up? No, there's still a few there.
Yeah, there's still some down there, but he ate a lot better once they were on the floor than when I was handing them to him.
We used to have squirrels in the church building, but we don't have them anymore, so they would just stay there and rot over time.
I will clean them up
Yes.
tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So, but anyway, so next week our topic is what?
Next week our topic is, I've got it
Aha.
right here,
Super clever.
someplace. Where to go? There it is. Screens versus texts.
Ah.
I saw an article, and I see them periodically, saying that physical books are better than screens, and so
that's what we're
I
gonna
want,
talk
and so
about.
that's what we're going to talk
Well,
about.
as a precursor to that discussion, I will say there's nothing better than opening up a brand new book and smelling the binding on the inside. I love that smell.
Well, it's a nice smell, but that's not my primary reason for getting a book.
Okay.
I don't think
New
that's.
textbooks. Oh my gosh, I love the smell.
I don't think the primary reason for people reading books is because, ooh, this smells good. I think there's more to it than that.
Okay.
So anyway, it's an interesting discussion. There are pluses and minuses to both, but we'll also put it in a wider historical context, which is better a codex, where your pages are what we think of as a book, or would a scroll. And you had arguments from scrolls to
Well, pages,
Codex.
you have to keep turning them. Scrolls, you just keep reading and reading.
yeah, but finding any of the
Right.
information.
Well,
looking
and
something up,
bookmarks don't work well in
Not so
scrolls.
well,
And you
no.
can't dog ear a scroll.
No. So, and we'll also talk about Socrates didn't even like the idea of writing that much, because it would make people not exercise their brains to memorize things, because they could just pick up a book and read it. So.
Well, and there was an argument that my dad made about when I started doing sermon notes that I shouldn't put all the scriptures up on the screen, because then people aren't used to using their Bibles. And it's like, well, it's still the same information, so that's another
Yeah,
thing
well, that
might
was
be
the
interesting to
latest
talk about.
thing. The latest article I'd read was in the context of physical Bibles versus.
Okay.
And
Hi, sweet boy.
anyway,
Like, do kids need to memorize the books of the Bible still?
yeah. Just as a spoiler alert, I come down more on the side of screens than. That is, I don't mind the new technology. I think it has many advantages. In fact, I haven't used a physical Bible in over a decade. So,
But in societies where changing books and changing words in books, it's good to have a physical one, because someone would have to actually physically come and change your book. Whereas if your book is online and they just want to change it, just upload a new one.
yeah. But then,
We're having that whole discussion now, so you don't need to tune in next week.
yeah, but the same
Well-
thing happens with physical books too. So we'll get
We'll
to that
duke
as
it out
well.
next week.
Yes, we will. Not this week.
Be here for that.
Yes. So come back next week. You can argue with us about it if you want to.
Yes.
So,
So have a good one, and we'll see you next week.
yep. Bye.
Say bye. Bye, people.
Where'd my mouse go? There it is.